Hello, and welcome to the First Stitch podcast, where we tell the stories of how everyday quilters just like you got started quilting, plus talk about some other fun quilty things along the way. This is your host, Lisa Donnelly from Wild Plum Lane. Let's get started. In this episode of The First Stitch, I'd like to introduce you to Cynthia, who wrote, "Nobody in my family quilted. Both of my husband's grandmothers and his aunt quilted. They all quilted by hand, not by machine. One day, I asked Grandma Dee if she would teach me to quilt. She said yes, but I was to first learn to quilt by hand and later by machine. She loved applique. She first taught me to turn the edges under, then without turning the edges under. Unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to go further because she began developing Alzheimer's. A few years later, I met a friend who quilted, who taught me and another friend of mine how to quilt from start to finish. The three of us quilted lots of quilts. My first quilt was a king-size quilt for my son's wedding. Since then, I have made several quilts and table runners. My last quilt was an Air Force quilt for my daughter-in-law's retirement. I'm currently finishing a specialty quilt for my dear friend who has just gone through a double mastectomy due to breast cancer. Soon, my son will be retiring from the Air Force, so I'm getting things together to make that special quilt. My quilt room looks like a storeroom with loads and loads of fabric, and I share my fabric with others who are financially strapped but love to quilt. I'm currently making lap quilts for my nieces and nephews and their children. To me, I'm passing down a history and a love of quilting to the younger generation, which was passed down to me from my grandmas. By the way, I do not follow a quilt pattern. I find a block or a few blocks I like and create my own complete quilt pattern around those blocks. It makes my quilts unique because there's not another one like them. I love taking on challenges, learning new techniques, and seeing what other quilters have accomplished. They are my inspiration. This is my story. From Cynthia. I'm always struck by how generous, thoughtful, and giving quilters are, and Cynthia's story is no exception. Thank you, Cynthia, for sharing your story with us. On a side note, aren't we all impressed by the fact that her first quilt was a king size? I thought a queen size quilt was a big one to start with, as you may have listened to in episode 1, but king size is a whole different level. For today's WIP-Finishing tip, I've got a simple one to help you get focused. Set a timer. First, decide if you can devote 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or 20 minutes to a project. I don't recommend going any longer than 20 minutes because it'll start to feel hard to set aside the time to begin, and the point here is to make it feel easy to start. Then set a timer and simply start moving forward until the timer goes off. Once you've gotten started, you can either keep going if you have time or, guilt-free, you can move on and know that you've made progress on your project. Keep in mind that any progress is good progress, and sometimes a small start makes it feel easier to jump back in when you have another few minutes to devote to your project. Your challenge this week, should you choose to take it, is to set a timer and see what kind of progress you can make on one of your works in progress. Just remember that you don't have to have a marathon quilting session to make meaningful progress. Even 5 minutes at a time will take you further than you can imagine. So back in episode 1, I shared about my Martelli rotary cutter, and this week I want to share another tool that I believe is super important to go right alongside it. I've had some of my closest quilty friends seriously injure themselves while cutting quilt fabric, leading to trips to the ER and unplanned, sometimes extended, breaks from quilting. And I don't want that to happen to you. I invite you to look into some cut-resistant work gloves that are designed to save your hands from just this type of injury. The best part about the gloves that I recommend are that they move with you, they have a sticky grip to hold your rulers in place while you're cutting fabric, and you can even use your touchscreens through the gloves in case you have your pattern up on your iPad. I've even tried to cut mine with a brand new rotary cutter blade without my fingers inside, and it didn't even come close to going through. One quick pro tip is that if you're teaching any kids or grandkids to sew and want to use a rotary cutter with them, these also come in smaller sizes that can work for older kids. I 100% make my kids wear them when they're using a rotary cutter. So if this little message saves one quilter from a serious quilt-stopping injury, I feel like I've done my job here. You can check them out for yourself down in the show notes. And with that, we'll wrap up this episode of the First Stitch podcast. If you enjoyed listening, I'd sure appreciate it if you'd hit the subscribe button in your favorite podcast player, write a review on Apple Podcasts, or tell your best quilty friends so they can listen too. By the way, do you have a story to share? Every quilter has a beginning to their story, and we'd love to hear yours. Plus, over the years, you might have picked up tips or tricks you could share with others. It might inspire another quilter, so we want to hear about it. Share your personal quilting journey, your best project finishing tip, or your first stitch moment. Your story might be read on an upcoming episode of The First Stitch. You can submit your story today by sending an email to firststitchpodcast, all one word, that's firststitchpodcast@wildplumlane.com, or use our quick submission form down in the show notes. I can't wait to talk with you again soon.